Hi, everybody. Lauren here. Welcome to another episode of Cool People, Big Ideas. I'm so excited for this interview today with my good friend. I'm going to lead with that. My good friend, writing mentor, and probably the best teacher that I've ever had, the writer Ann Hood. I met Ann when I was a student at New York University, and I took I don't know how many writing classes now with her, but I just remember every single one of them. Not only was the curriculum amazing and she was an incredible teacher, but she was so open and generous as a teacher and as a person. You know, when you're in university and you're a student, like the professors are like, oh, and we would go to her house in Brooklyn and have potlucks and do our writing group circles back then. And it was just incredible. I remember going to some Italian restaurants in the village and having writing group there. It was just phenomenal. And she is still a mentor and a writing teacher of mine to this day. I run things by her all the time. I share ideas and I hire her to help edit things for me because she's that good. But that's just my personal relationship with her. She's also an unbelievable writer with so many books to her credit. I'm just going through this newest book that we're talking about today is called The Stolen Child. And we had some delays in filming. And so I went back and reread a bunch of other books of hers that I had read before. I reread Comfort. I read Morningstar, Fly Girl. I've read almost everything she's written, her whole young adult series of time traveling books. She is prolific and an incredibly beautiful writer and an incredibly beautiful person. And you're about to see that right now. So sit back, relax. And if you're a knitter, you can keep knitting while you listen to the pearls of wisdom from Ann Hood. Hope you enjoy it. Hi, Ann Hood. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm always happy to be with you, Lauren.
Oh my gosh. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. So, just to give a little context, I invited you on to talk about what at the time was your new book. And since then, you've published another book. And we were meant to talk, or we are going to talk about The Stolen Child, which is absolutely wonderful. And we got kind of interrupted from when we were going to do our podcast. And so I had some extra time and I went on an Ann Hood deep dive. So I reread, I read Morningstar, which I can't believe I hadn't read yet.
That's like a little treasure of mine. I love that little book. I mean,
It,
it's so personal, but I know people can relate to it with their own versions of the books. Do you know what I mean? Like
yes.
those books were special to me, but I always imagine a reader reading it and saying, "Oh, my rabbit run was this book." Like, just being
Yes.
able to line it up.
Yes, absolutely. It was beautiful. And it took me, I was like, oh, I want to read that. I want to reread that. I actually went a little bit of a deep dive into Herman Wouk after that and read his
Oh.
biography or autobiography, Fiddler and Sailor. Have you read that?
No, is it good?
It's wonderful. It is wonderful. And I
Oh.
read that because of that book, of your books.
Really?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'm
yeah.
excited to read
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And actually, something came up in that I'll talk about later. But so I read that. I reread Comfort, which always holds a beautiful place in my heart. And it's also one of those books that I can't fully like have it in the present all the time. Like I have to tuck it away. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely know.
Yeah, yeah. It's too hard to have it be just as the present, So I
Mhm.
tuck it away and look at it when I can. And then I just read Fly Girl. Oh my
Yay!
God, it was so good. I loved it. Okay, so
Lauren, people I've known for so many years are like, I had no idea what your life was like before I knew you.
right, right. I mean, just amazing. Some of the imagery and the visuals in that, but also just the crazy schedule you had, Anne.
And Lauren, it's funny to think that that was just a couple years before I met you.
I
I was
know.
doing that job.
I know. I thought of that too. I was like, wow,
Right? I
that's,
thought
yeah.
about that this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So, but we're going to get to all those. We're going to start with The Stolen Child, which I have my copy here. I apologize that I don't have the cover. The cover is gorgeous. So if you're looking at this blue cover, go buy the copy of the book yourself so that you have the cover art, because this book is really, it's a piece of art, but it also talks a lot about art and how
Yeah.
art works in our lives and changes us in our lives. And so, I want to get into The Stolen Child, but I'm going to make an admission to you. People have heard now from the introduction that you were my writing teacher at university. So you've guided me a lot in my books, in my reading, but I'm going to make an admission to you now. I don't read fiction.
Mm.
I'm a,
Well,
that,
Lauren, you mostly don't write fiction, so that makes sense. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? You tend to
yeah,
write memoir, nonfiction, your beautiful essays that blew me away. Was that last year? I think you were in my class, or a
yeah, yeah,
couple years
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
And so I do think writers sometimes, not always, tend to read what they write because it's
yeah.
almost like you're always in school.
Yes, absolutely.
You're
And
always
the reason
learning from what you're reading.
that's exactly right. I'm always learning, so I'm always reading nonfiction because I'm reading scientists. I'm reading, all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
so your book came out, and I thought, okay, I'm going to read it. But I was really resistant and hesitant. I was like, oh, I'm going to read it, but then I've got to interview, so I've got to, not that I've got to like it, because I'm just. But I was like, but my first thought when I opened it up was, why am I gonna? I'm just fully disclosure. I'm gonna fully just say what I was thinking in my head. Why am I gonna read this? Not that it's a waste of time, but it's fiction. It's not real. And so, what is even the point of reading fiction? So I'm going to start with that because I came to my own point by the time I finished this book with tears streaming down my face. But I want you, as the author, to tell us, because you write in many different genres, we're going to get to that too, but why fiction? Why should we read fiction? And then why should we read this book of fiction?
I love this question, the general question of why we read fiction, because I say, and I'm kind of stealing it from Joan Didion, but you read fiction to understand what we think. Fiction is a way of watching a story play out almost safely. Like, whereas when you read a memoir, you're getting into someone's life, and it's often, if they're writing a memoir, scary stuff, um, big stuff. But it's sort of like, to me, fiction is like, why do we watch movies? You get lost in a world, you get lost in a story that isn't real, but it's true, which is more important than being real.
Mm.
You know, I Tim O'Brien at Breadloaf, I think you did meet him there.
Oh, yes.
He said, yes, oh yes. He often said, I don't write about Vietnam, and he's renowned for his books on Vietnam. I don't write about Vietnam. I write about love. And if people don't get it, I just go back and write about Vietnam again. So we use fiction for metaphor, for a portal into bigger truths. And believe me, because I write in other genres, I'm not saying you don't get that with memoir or nonfiction. But fiction to me is like panoramic. It's like the movies.
Mm. Mm. So interesting. I never equated to them. I love movies. I'm a huge moviegoer, watcher. I've written a couple of screenplays. It didn't even really occur to me like that because it's such an intimate form, reading, right? And movie watching, I
Yeah.
don't feel to be intimate in the way that writing is intimate.
I guess I understand that. In a way, it's sort of like, it's counterintuitive, but I think it's both. Because when you see a movie, you can even be in a movie theater, which I go to the movies a couple times a week. Like, I love going to the movies. But everybody in that movie theater, although you're having a communal experience, is having an intimate relationship with the movie. And that's why I think when you leave a movie, you can't believe that the person you saw it with was like, I didn't get it, or that character drove me crazy. And you're like, wait, what? I loved that. So I think there is that form of intimacy in movies as well.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I can see that for sure. There's just something about like the words just going directly into your brain, that just feels so much
Yeah.
more intimate, right? Because it's right there.
Yeah.
Your words are in my brain.
Like it imprints.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
imprints in your
Yeah.
brain. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're doing it well, in your heart too.
Yeah, right. Which is what I came to when I finished this book. I understood. This is what I wrote down: to make sense of the world, for emotion versus fact, like the truth of emotion, which you
That's
don't get in
right.
a nonfiction book. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, this book was so powerful on so many levels. Do you know how your stories end? I know a lot of writers write towards to find out what happens. Do you know what's going to happen, or do you write towards that?
Yeah. No, I know.
You know.
I know. And someone told me once a writer always knows their first page and their last page. It's the big middle, the other 320 pages they don't know. And that's kind of me because I feel like in literature, every story is that journey that Homer gave us of getting home.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's home means different things depending on the story that you're telling. And on that journey, obstacles are thrown into the path. And so you have to know why the hero is setting out, what their mission is, and you have to know where they're going to end up. And it isn't an either or thing, they get home or not. There's a million
Mm-hmm.
variables there. And a writer once told me, that is literature, that the first page and last page are kind of opposites, um, either literally in setting, in the character's thoughts, or even metaphorically. And so in my book, The Knitting Circle, which is about a woman overcoming enormous grief, or not overcoming it, but working through it, I should say, the first line is Mary showed up empty handed. And when I had that line in my head, I knew it was the perfect line because it encapsulated the story.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, this is the first day she showed up in a year to anything, but she's empty handed. She has nothing to offer. And when I knew that would be the first line, I understood that the last page would be about abundance. But I didn't know what that meant really. It was more of a metaphor. And then the fun of it is abundant how, and how are we going to move her from empty to abundant? And what are the obstacles going to be thrown in her path? And so that's how the story starts unfolding. So for me, that part's the discovery.
I love that. I love that. And just as a little side note here, do you have in mind who is going to play Mary in the movie version, which just got announced that it's being made into a
Uh,
movie? Congratulations.
Thank you. We did have a very preliminary talk about that. And it's three women have optioned it. And I love it. Like they're just these kick, can I say kick ass?
Yeah,
Kick
yeah.
ass women. And they're so excited, but one of them has wanted to option it for many, many years, but it was under an option. And so the person she had imagined is now too old to play Mary. So she's sort of back at, yeah. So I don't know. We
That's
threw
funny.
around some names. You have a dream list and,
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's going to be fun. I can't wait.
yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. You said, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts in preparation for this. You said that you're every character in the book, and so I saw you in both Jenny, and we're back to the Stolen Child now. I saw you in
Right.
both Jenny and in Gerald, and I was thinking about it after because Jenny kind of grew up in a similar time of that you had, and so you said you were able to look at all of those over, and I wondered, do you see yourself, obviously in Jenny, but do you see yourself in Gerald as well, and and how do you like? How is your essence there, but then the character becomes something that has to not be you?
Hmm. It's interesting because I'll start with the Jenny question. I knew I wanted this World War I situation. I where Nick is in the trench, and I had learned about trench art, and I really wanted to explore that. And the idea of art, which you mentioned, was so integral to the book because I wanted the reader to see what art gives us, what it can do. It can keep us company when we're alone and cold and lonely. It can free us. It can buy us things, and there's even a commercial thing side to it. Um, it can make us the person we are. It can help us be who we really are meant to be. So I wanted to explore all that. And then I knew I was sort of at a point in my life when I began it, which was like 6 years ago, 5 years ago, that you started thinking about decisions you've made. And what if I had done this instead of that? What if I had not moved here? What if I had taken this job that was going to send me to Chicago or whatever? And what you start seeing your life as kind of like this river with all these tributaries that you could have traveled. And so because that was kind of on my mind, I wanted to have a character who made a decision. Of course, it's fiction, so it has to be heightened, elevated. Made a decision that kind of ruined his life, and that he wanted to find out what had happened as a result of it, which is, the journey of the story. When I did that and I did some math, I realized that he would be going around 1973 or 74, which was when I graduated from high school. So it was like I was like, I've got Jenny down. I've got her. I know how she dresses. I know what she wants because I know the music she's listening to. I know the mood. So that was great. But you always have to change. Like you come up with that. And then you ask the question, as my friend Gregory McGuire told me, then what? And that is what's different about it. And so I was the kid in high school who was voted most likely to succeed. And so, but what if you are given that burden and you fail? And then she wasn't me anymore. Jenny became a person living with failure at a very young age, at her own decision and regret. So, you dig down and there's that acorn of me, but it grows into a different tree,
Yeah.
And so with Nick, what I was exploring with him was that idea of what if one of the decisions I made changed my life forever in a way that I needed to untangle it. But everybody has the seed of what his character was, which is a young, hopeful person who does the wrong thing.
Yeah. And I mean, just pulling those threads out in my own life was part of the intensity of reading that book, and knowing that not all, you just can't go back, right? And so, but he is going back, and he's trying to go back and resolve things. You have a major theme in your work is time travel. I've read all of the Treasure Chest series, the young adult, where they literally go back in time travel, and they're wonderful. I'm so happy to see that they're being re-released. I love that. And even though this isn't a time travel book per se in the same magical way that the Treasure Chest series is, it is a time travel book. You're going back and forth in time, and there are themes that kind of weave back and forth in those, because you go back in many different time stratas in there. And so I wonder if that is, if there's some, to go back onto with Joan Didion, is if there's some magical realism thinking in here, if there's some way for you to kind of, that you love going back into time as well, just like, could you change things in the past?
Well, it's interesting because for some reason, and I sometimes I don't understand why I make the choices I do. Sometimes fictionally, and sometimes I do. They're very deliberate. But for some reason, I really wanted this book, The Stolen Child, to have fluidity with chronology. I wanted it to be very time fluid. So I didn't think of it so much, but I like the way you said that. I hadn't thought of it that way. I wanted us to be in the story's present, which is 1974, and then be in 1942, and then be in, I wanted it to have those, and I wanted it to be seamless, because I guess I am a believer that time is fluid. And you can convince me that right now, I mean, I don't believe this 100%, but I can be convinced of Einstein's idea that we're living here, but there's a parallel world, that we're living something else. Like, all of that makes a certain sense to me. So I didn't think of this as magical realism, but I definitely wanted fluidity with time. And maybe that is a kind of time travel. I like that very much, that idea very much. Yeah.
Because you want to go back and correct as a reader, right? We want to go back and correct, like, oh, don't do that, don't do that, or go do that.
Yeah.
This is a really specific question. What is the significance? I love that a lot of this takes place in Italy, and I know you've got a big connection from Italy. Your family's from Italy. You've spent a lot of time there and done a ton of research. So, what is the significance of the Tarantella chapter with Enzo? So there's this big feast, and his niece is dancing in this big festival and has a fight with her best girlfriend, and we meet the girlfriend and we see all of this thing, and Enzo, one of the main characters in the books, has a really beautiful interaction with not his niece, but with the niece's friend. And so, can you talk a little bit about, like, I was kind of, well, I'm not sure why this is in here. I loved it. I wrote down, it's so lush, the food and its abundance, and it's just so gorgeous, everything. But I'm like, why? Tell us why that's such an important scene.
So here's the practical part of writing a book. Every about 30 pages, we leave the main story and we go to Enzo in Naples. And it's very mathematical because I wanted him to appear every so many times. And he is moving forward in time by decades, while the main story, the present story, this is the time fluidity again, is just moving forward as it would weeks or the next month or on this trip, right? And so I, again, using a little math and a poster board and like pulling my hair out because I'm so bad at math, writing down what years make sense because it's got to catch up with the present. So literally, if it's every 30 pages and we first see him in 1930 or whatever, how many times? And then I targeted years that we would see him. And then I researched what was going on in Naples, Italy in those years. And I rejected so many things, but they used to have that big Tarantella competition in Sorrento, which is across the bay from Naples. Well, that caught my attention. First of all, the opportunity for nice writing and for cultural writing, and for tension. There's a contest, right? And so that's what I chose for that year because of all the things I found kind of happening then that appealed to me. And what Enzo realizes, and I don't think this is a spoiler, is that his niece has sort of made bad decisions because so much of the book is about the decisions we make. She's kind of the girlfriend, not kind of, she is the girlfriend and has fallen hard for like the local mafia family son. And her friend, and he knows that and it makes him sad. But her friend, who his niece thinks also likes that boy, is a more developed and emotionally developed person because she's not mourning that she lost a boy, she's mourning that she lost a friend. And so, not that there's lessons every time we see Enzo, but he, and therefore the reader, gets enlightened about human nature. And it was about how friendship matters. And of course, that's being played out in the present as Nick and Jenny become friends. They start off kind of opposite. So there's a lot of layers of why those chapters are in there in general, but that one in particular.
Oh, it's beautiful because it is such a beautiful theme in that you see, and again, that's part of the beauty of fiction. And it just popped into my head because I kind of see you in some of these characters, but you said you're every character in the book. I'm not sure that I see you in Nick. And then you just said something here about the themes of this book being bad decisions. And so I
Mm.
wonder, is there some corollary to you in that? I mean, you've written, and we're going to get to some of the other things and the other themes that you've written quite extensively about. But from what I've seen, and now I feel like I've read nearly everything that you've written, I don't see a theme of bad decisions coming through your work. And knowing you, I don't see that as a theme. So that just popped in as curious to me. Can you talk about you as Nick and that theme?
Yet not bad decisions, but questioning your decisions. So
Mm-mm.
they may be, ultimately, and I did, maybe you've read it because you did such good research, but I recently wrote an article for Oldster magazine, and it was about decisions and decisions I've made and how you have the fantasy. Here we go with time travel again. of going back and saying, stop, young woman, of 25, don't go with that guy, don't do that. Or 30-year-old or 15-year-old, don't get in that moving van, stay where you are, because we know how it all played out. But then, of course, and it might seem cliche, but then, of course, the realization is there's no bad decisions because you ended up where you're supposed to be. And so that's more of what Nick has to learn. And I think what we all have to learn.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna have to sit with that because I feel like I've got some bad decisions, not just that landed me, but like that I regret. And I feel like this book
Oh,
a
well,
lot is about regretful decisions because, Nick really regretted his decision.
yeah.
I felt.
I think, I think regret is part of those decisions that we could have done differently because we'll never know
Mhm.
had we done the other. So, of course, there's regret built into that.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. I've got some more questions about this, but I know we're going to do a little post podcast with some spoiler alerts. So I want to make sure that I don't do any spoilers in this main one. But you drop a lot of Easter eggs in your work. Um, Starting with the very first, the very first couple pages of the book where we meet Enzo and we kind of get the pacing for that. And I am pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. The date that the whole thing starts is April 18th. So that's an Easter egg that only people who know you would know what that means. But there were other Easter eggs in the book as well. And so I'm wondering, do you write those for your readers? Like Taylor Swift writes those in all of her songs, all of her work, or is this just for yourself and for
Yes, for my
for?
own amusement.
Hmm.
It's for me.
Nice.
I have so many. So I'll tell you a couple. In this book, when I realized that the young character who's going to go with Nick was of my age, and I named her Jenny because that's the main character in Love Story, which was my favorite book when I was that age. So
Nice.
that's kind of fun, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the knitting circle, here is a spoiler. In the knitting circle, I knew one of the women was going to die, and so I named her Beth because that's who dies in Little Women, one of my favorite books.
Yes.
And so I kind of look at things like that, and then I'm really happy with the name, and it has some like closeness to me right away, like it becomes
Mhm.
intimate. So that's and another thing is that for much of my youth, I had a crush on my brother's friend, and he drove a white Volkswagen Bug. And so often, if I'm writing about the 60s or 70s, someone will be in a white Volkswagen, and he noticed that. I'm still friends with him, and he sent one day an envelope comes, and it is a blown up picture of that car, and with a note that says, "You seem to have liked it so much that I thought I'd send it to you."
Oh, that is hilarious. Oh my
So I do
gosh.
kind of pick these things that mean something to me. Number one, it's kind of fun and just like amusing. But secondly, it does give me like a closeness to certain things, you
Mm,
know?
mm. Oh, I love that. I love that. Um,
You might
okay.
note the name of national disasters. They're often the name of like my boyfriend's ex or new girlfriends. I'll give them like hurricane names or something.
Oh my gosh, that's so excellent. Oh my God, I love it. I love it. Okay, so I want to. I've got other questions about the book, but I'm going to save those for spoilers because I have a couple. I've got some spoiler questions in the
Yeah.
book
Okay.
because it was it's such a beautiful book, and the themes are so powerful about loss, about regret, and about how we find our own path moving forward. Just really beautiful, and I'm glad that you brought up. You wrote all. It started because of your interest in in trench art in World War I,
Yep.
and just that idea, right? This art being created literally underground, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
a powerful theme in and of itself, of the things that these men, they were all men, did to try to survive. And I feel that you know you write a lot about grief. It's one of the major themes in your work, certainly somewhat recently, the last 10, 20, 30 or so years. for those of you who don't know, Anne lost a child at age 5. It's going to make me cry. I actually thought at one point that maybe Jenny was Grace, because
Yeah.
when I did the math, I thought, oh, she would be that age right now, almost like I didn't.
Uh,
So I wondered about that. But do you feel that this is still a topic for you of desire or needing to continue to excavate, to work with, to relieve something, to try to figure something out in your own life or own mind?
because, well, Lauren, I think that's the one topic and emotion that we never figure out. And so we grapple with it forever.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I do think we start to learn and maybe get better at, I'm not sure about that, but about love, for example, or what makes it, or happiness, or regret, But I think grief, you never quite understand because it's so permanent and it's so definitive and it's so powerful. Um, and in fact, it's interesting, the trench art actually ties into that. Although I was fascinated by the actual art when my son sent me I think it's an Instagram account of this National Geographic photographer who was photographing it in France. What really appealed to me, and I actually wanted to go and see them, see the trenches, but you can't visit them because they're so fragile, which is why he's photographing them, because they're preserving them, but in film. It's because as a person who's like kind of fascinated with World War I, what I immediately thought when I saw these pictures was the chances are that that soldier who made that drawing on that wall or, carved something that they found on the floor of the trench, his chances are that he stepped out of that trench and was killed. So it's like the last thing he did. And of course, chances are they were very young. And so that kind of ties into the topic that I'm, as you said, exploring. That's what actually appealed to me about it, that they were like a last gasp,
That is fascinating. We work with that a lot in the work that I do in energy medicine yoga, of sort of, if you knew your time was limited, what would you do? And we do this meditation where it takes you through, if you knew you had 1 year, and then it's down to, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute, like what would you do? And what is so powerful about this book that you wrote is these young men, on some level, knowing that they were very strongly in the last parts of their
Yeah.
life.
Yep.
What they did for solace was to make art.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you write in a lot of different genres. You write fiction, you write nonfiction, memoir, you've edited several anthologies, you write young adult novels. So is there another genre that you haven't explored yet that you're interested in exploring?
There's two answers to that. The first one is there was one, but I'm having a book come out next year in that genre, which is picture books. I have a picture book. Yeah.
Wow. Can you talk a little more about what it is?
Yeah. The title is I Am Piggy. And it's based on my daughter, Annabelle's, I pointed because Annabelle's actually sitting behind me, Annabelle's lovey that she had since she was a baby, which was this beautiful, very pink stuffed pig who now is completely gray and flat and worn and ripped. I even brought Piggy to a doll hospital in Paris to be fixed, brought back to life. And the doll doctor, examined Piggy and said, Piggy est morte. There's no hope for Piggy. And so, but there's Piggy. And when Annabelle, she goes to Sarah Lawrence University or college, I don't know what CLC, college. And my cousin gave Piggy a Sarah Lawrence onesie. So that's what's kind of holding Piggy together at this point. And so I just wanted to celebrate Piggy, who was loved to death.
Yeah, right.
So my first effort when I sent it to the editor, who was interested in the idea, I hadn't bought the idea yet, but he said, okay, you're a novelist. This book you wrote about Piggy is like 10 board books. Like children's books that are board books are very simple. They don't get on airplanes and travel and meet people. Like, it's like a 1-year-old's looking at this.
Oh
So
my
it took
gosh.
me a while to understand the form.
Yeah.
It was a challenge. It was fun. And now it's accepted and coming out next year. I am Piggy.
Wow.
It's in
Oh,
Piggy's
wow.
voice.
Oh, I love
So that's
that.
one answer. But the one I
Okay.
have not tackled, and I wish I could do it, is poetry. I love
Mm,
poetry. I read poetry. I go to poetry readings. I just think it's our most beautiful,
mm. Yeah.
intense form of expression.
Yeah.
And if I try to write a poem, it's like an 8th grade or like a middle school kid and, got an assignment. It's just, I don't know what that is, how poets do it. So that's
Yeah.
one, maybe someday.
Oh, I love it. We'll be waiting for that. Um, okay, I want to talk about some of the nonfiction that you've written because, like I said, I just went back and I reread Comfort and I read Morningstar, which I absolutely adored, and then I read Fly Girl, which I absolutely adored. And my first overarching question is, I mean, each of these books in their own way is unbelievably, deeply, and incredibly personal. You put it all out there. You do not hold anything back. And how I don't know how to even ask this exactly, but how does that make you feel, especially when you go to readings? It's no longer just your work on a page. It is out there. The world is reading it. People are interviewing you and asking you very personal questions about the personal things that you wrote. So how do you navigate that emotionally so that you can like still keep some of yourself, right? I would imagine you still need to do that. And I can give you
Mhm.
just a little, like my hesitancy about publishing some of the works that you've read is because they're so deeply
Yeah,
personal. I'm just not sure I'm
right.
ready to have. And then here you are doing just that. So how do you navigate that emotionally after?
What's interesting is memoir and essay writing is a craft. It's not reporting. It's not telling everything that happened. It's actually shaping a story. So although people think and feel exactly what you just described, you don't even have the whole story. So I'm exposing what I'm comfortable exposing and what my story needed to be a story that people might want to read that has an arc, right? I'm not just sitting down and throwing my heart and my guts on the page. Writing writing memoir and essay is a craft, and you have to, and part of it's just like writing a novel. It's John McPhee said that the most important part of nonfiction writing is what you omit, what you don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, I mean, I will say, to be honest, Comfort was the hardest book tour I've ever been on. The questions, more than that, the people who connected to the book and so told me their stories.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was taking on so much pain. And I would go back to the hotel, and it was a long book tour. And I would go back to the hotel, open that mini bar, get a bottle of white wine, not a giant one, but those little splits,
Mm-hmm.
and sit down just to calm myself
Mm-hmm.
and just cry, not even about my own grief, but how hard this world is. And there are so many tears. And of course, we know that kind of led to the Museum of Tears. That experience kind of led to that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the Museum of Tears, to go back to the stolen child. And I think at the end, in the acknowledgments, you write about where that a genesis came from of crying so many
Right.
tears. And as someone
Yeah.
who's also cried so many tears, even today, like not this exact actual day,
Yeah.
in today's time,
Yeah.
I've had that. I've got an aging dog who is to me like a child, and it's like
Yeah.
knowing that your child is going to die, and every moment that I'm with him, I'm practically crying all the time, and I think
Yeah.
about that, the how you wrote about that, like what is in these tears and how many, where are they made? How could there be this endless amount of them?
Endless. Endless,
Endless.
right?
Um,
It's like,
I
don't we,
did,
doesn't it stop at some point? But it
right,
doesn't.
right. I just had a friend tell me that your tears actually contain a homeopathic remedy to grief themselves. And like, so the other day I was crying and
Really?
I was trying to like get the tears to go into my mouth. So I could,
Take that
uh,
treatment.
yeah, so I could take that treatment. But that's really, that's interesting that you say that. So now, of course, I'm like, now I need to go back and read all those books. And what did she leave out? What is the bigger story?
There are things that you don't need to tell. When I wrote the memoir, Do Not Go Gentle, which was about trying to get a miracle cure for my father when he had lung cancer, um, in the first or the early drafts, I would say the first few drafts, I revealed so many things. I had this aunt, one of my mother's sisters. My mother had 7 sisters. One of her sisters who just was not a nice person, was mean to everybody. She was always not talking to half the family. And every time she appeared, it was on the page, she seems bad. I mean, she was not a pleasant person. And then in like the 3rd or 4th draft, I'm like, she doesn't even matter this story. Why do I need to even reveal her? She doesn't even need to be in this book. And, you start pruning, and there are just things I don't want people to know. So I think Dani Shapiro has an essay somewhere about this topic where people believe they know her so well, but they only know what she has decided to show them, right?
And that, thank you for saying that, because that's sort of the nub of my question, is that people feel like they know you. And it's like, I do know you. I've known you for a long time, but but now with each one of these new books, I certainly didn't know young Anne. I mean, super young Anne. I knew young Anne, but I didn't know like childhood Anne, right?
Right.
And like and the whole, so Morningstar and Fly Girl are 2 life stories of yours that, and I just loved them. Like, your attention to detail, your memory is mind-boggling to me. The details that you remember. But it feels like, forget that I have any experience with you in real life. Just from reading those, I feel like I know you. So that if I came to a reading, I could be like, Anne, you need to be my new best friend. We need to go. Like, I feel like people do that to you. Do people do that to you?
All the time. No, they do. Like, I'll talk to a luncheon and there'll be like 50 or 100 or more, mostly women. My audience is women. And then when I'm signing books, they're like, oh my God, if you lived in my neighborhood, we would have coffee all the time. Like, you would come over all the time. We're like, I just want you to join my book club, or, whatever. And I'm thinking, you just so don't know. You might not like me if you actually hung out with me. I don't know. But maybe you would, but I've painted a picture and you have that picture.
And we love the picture. Okay, so Morningstar, which I wish I had in hand right now, but I don't have it here. I loved it. My mom lives in a little town in Maine, and they didn't have it at her library. And so I was like, you have to get this book. You have to own this book at the library so that my mom can read it, but then so everybody else can read it too.
Oh my God.
So hopefully they're going to get that. But one of the things that, I went back, and it's obviously named after Marjorie Morningstar, by Herman Wouk. And when I was younger, I read almost everything that he wrote, but I went back and read his autobiography, one of them. I think he's written a few. He wrote it at 100 or 99 years old. It was like thoughts from a 99-year-old author, or something like that.
I was going to say, didn't he live to like 104? I'm not kidding. I think it was 104.
No, he did. Yeah. And so I'm just going to ask this because it resonated in the field. I work a lot in field theory. I don't know that you might know this already, but he had a 5-year-old son who died. Did you know that?
No.
He had a son who died at 5-year-old. I think his name was Abe. In I want to say a pool accident. He at the time wrote that he would never, ever, ever write about that story. And he wrote a teeniest bit in this autobiography. When he's 99, he's finally able to write about this. But one of the things he said was, every death that I write about, and Winds of War, he writes a lot about death.
Yes.
Every death that I write about is Abe.
Yeah.
Is Abe. And
that's beautiful.
It was beautiful, heart-wrenching and beautiful. And I couldn't help seeing the similarities. You had a daughter who died at 5, and you were such a huge Herman Wouk fan that I just assumed that you knew that, or thought maybe you had known that fact. And that
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So okay,
Interesting.
so then my question for you is similar to that. Do you feel that when you write about death, are you writing about grace again and again? Is that something that you kind of use as your impetus?
I not consciously, but yes. I mean, it's so ingrained in me now,
Mm-hmm.
that it's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I actually at one point was like, I want this character to have had loss, but it can't be another 5-year-old child. Like, I can't keep doing
Mm-hmm.
that.
Right. Right.
So I now try to not disguise it because people who read me and know me
Yeah.
see it, but I try to explore it. And, I think of it like a disco ball and you spin it and all those different sparks are coming on. You
Mm-hmm.
try to catch one of them to
Yeah.
explore.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about this. I mean, I love that you you keep grace alive for you, but for all of us as well. Like it's a really beautiful thing. And for those of us that have lost someone, I don't know if you've ever
Mm,
listened to Martine Prechtel talk on grief and praise, but talking about like how we overcome. Not that we ever let go of the grief, but we do need to continue on in our lives.
right, right.
And I love you talk about this, about the rituals in terms of continuing to have grace in your life. It is one of really the most exquisite things that I've heard in terms of just that idea of keeping love alive for someone who's passed. And one of the things that you've done is started an imprint. Can you talk a little bit about Gracie Bell?
Yeah. So, one of the kind of consequences of Comfort being published is that when I taught at writers' conferences, people flocked to me if they were writing grief stories. I mean, I have had workshops of 12 to 15 people, and they are all writing a grief memoir,
Mm-hmm.
and they came to study that with me. And it's a big responsibility because it is in general, just in a human way, but many people who want to write about grief aren't writers. They just have had the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, and you can't go to them and start tearing apart their work. Not that I do it that way, but critiquing them in the way you would somebody who had studied writing and was a serious writer. Like when I turn my attention to your writing, I'm being as honest as I can be with you because you've studied it, you have a craft. But these kind of brokenhearted people who aren't writers and are trying to figure out how do I tell my story in a way that people will read it. And honestly, Lauren, some of them I've worked with 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, because they've had to learn how to write and then learn how to write a story and then learn how to write this story. And
Mm-hmm.
after all of this and their dedication, they were getting rejections from agents and or editors saying, um, either, oh, we can't, nobody's going to buy this. It's too sad. Or the worst one for me, oh, Ann Hood wrote the definitive book on it. So like I've helped them and I'm the reason that they're being turned down. And so when the umpteenth former student wanted me to be like her outside reader for her MFA about the loss of her little 5 or 6-year-old son, um, she's an exquisite writer. And the story was very different. She had joined the Peace Corps, was sent to a village, tiny village in Thailand, married a villager, lived there and had children. She was living the life of really like a remote, and her son gets leukemia. And what she did, and it was amazing. And I read it, and I, of course, did what I had to do to help her to graduate. But I said, next question is she's going to ask me for an agent, and no one's going to take this. And I said, I'm going to do something about that. And I called Johnny Temple, who's the publisher of Akashic Books, which is a wonderful publishing house that has a different model. You get paid very little as an advance, but you share all the royalties instead of the model of the big houses. And he's very forward thinking, as that model shows. And he's a citizen of the world, is like an amazing guy. And I thought this appeals to him. I bet this will be like the Thailand, the class stuff, the stuff she had to grapple with. And I called him and I just said what I said to you about my experiences. And then I said, so I want to start an imprint. And he said, okay, let's do that. And so we met for lunch and he says, let's do a book a year. And because he's who he is and because of my acknowledgement or observance that there's a big hole in publishing with this. Grace Ubel Books was born.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I encourage our listeners to go check out some of these books, and you hand select every book that's published. Is that right?
Yes, and I edit it.
And you edit them. And how many books have been published so far?
3. The first one that I described is called Now You Can See the Sky. The second one was about a husband losing his beloved wife very suddenly, fairly young, called Planet Claire. And the most recent one that just came out in September is called The 5-Dog Epiphany. And it's about how after her son died suddenly, her 17-year-old son, she and her husband started rescuing Bichons. And how, I mean, the real message is how the dogs rescued her during her grief. But it's a beautiful book. Yeah.
That sounds beautiful. And I wonder if all of this time, I mean, one of the things that I explore in my work is ways to release trauma, get over trauma, synthesize trauma. And one of the ways to do that is actually writing your trauma story. And so I wonder if whether these people in your groups have ever published or not, if you experienced with them that arc of healing simply by writing.
I think it's a part of healing, but there's so many parts, as you know.
Yeah.
I wish, there's no magic one, or writing doesn't do it, and as I experienced, many people I know who are writers, something traumatic like that, you actually can't write. And many people who weren't writers, they get comfort in writing because there's something about what's familiar that becomes scary. And so I think we turn to something different. Yeah. That's why I started knitting, right?
That goes to my next question. So you wrote an article on knitting versus yoga for healing.
And knitting versus yoga?
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, you wrote an article on knitting. My note here is knitting versus yoga. Sorry for.
Oh, I'm like, I don't think I did that. Yeah.
No, you didn't. So I wanted to talk about that because that played a huge part in your healing, and it is the theme of your soon to be a major motion picture movie. And so can you talk a little bit about that, about the knitting, and you did quite a lot of research for that article about like the, brain entrainment and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Yeah. So I was, an editor said to me, because I kept bringing, every time I met with him monthly, I had this column in a magazine called Walking Magazine. And I would go to Boston to meet with him, and I would always hand off something I had knit, and I wasn't a very good knitter at the time either, but like some lumpy hat or like crooked scarf. And finally he's like, I can't stop it. He said, it's like when your friends grow zucchini and at a certain point you're hiding from them because you cannot take any more zucchini. That's how I feel about your knitting. So
great.
But he said, why does it work? And I said, I don't know. It's meditative. I said a few ideas. He said, no, I mean, find out, write about it. And so I explored it. And what I learned was that there is a physiological benefit that comes from repetition. And actually what was pretty, and might be what you kind of were thinking about, is me included. Many people thought, oh, it's like yoga. But actually you use a different kind of, yoga has its obviously healing powers, but it's a different kind of thing. Knitting is more like swimming, where you're doing repetitive actions, right? Or gardening. Something that just means you can sit and do the same motion. It does certain things physiologically to your blood pressure, your heart rate, and I think your soul and your heart, brain, all of it. But it's a different way to get there. But I thought too, all the things that help us spiritually, like yoga and knitting, but they're actually different things work. They work differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you had said was that knitting, you don't have to be thinking about anything. I mean, once you know what the pattern is, right? So your mind can do something else.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing, because it's a little more complicated than that. Your mind can do something else, but if it does too much of the other thing, you mess up, even if you're doing something quite simple. So your brain is actually doing two things, either passively or actively, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
You have to maintain, you're thinking about, like, I'm always thinking about my writing.
Yeah.
And then if all of a sudden I look and I've dropped stitches. It's like, oh, the writing took over. I didn't keep that
Mm,
balance. That makes it
mm-hmm.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this kind of is going to dig a little deeper in this because you call yourself an eternal optimist. And so I'm curious, do you monitor your mind for negative thoughts and how do you deal with them when they come up?
Well, I'm Italian. So when they come up, they flare up. No holding back. But I'm just not a negative person. Like I don't see things negatively. I don't know. I just don't.
Mhm.
Um, in the smallest example, but today picked up my daughter at college to bring her into the city. And she has two cats, and I have two cats, and she's bringing her cats home for the holidays. And she's like, "But my cats fight, and if I keep them in my room, what are we going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's see. Like it'll work out." And she goes, "Yeah, but if they do, and then this happened, and your cats will, and I was like, "I don't know, but there's always a solution." That's the kind of I just never like I don't let that stop me from trying things or doing things. Like it might be crazy town in my house
Yeah.
with four cats and two locked in a room that don't get along. I don't know, but I said, "Well, just try stuff until it works." So it's hard for me to be blocked by things, especially things that haven't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of people I think get stuck in, but then what if?
Right.
If I do
Right.
this, what about that? Or if I say this to that person, and then I know they're going to say this, and you talk yourself into like an
Yeah.
eddy of despair.
Right.
And right? And I'm just like, I don't know what they'll say if I say that. So let me say it. Or things typically work out. Not always politically, but we're not here to talk about
No, 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 no. And you don't
that.
feel you don't feel yourself like sideswept. I mean, I know that after Grace passed, you had quite a long time before you were like functioning in the
Oh,
world
yeah.
again, and that
Yeah.
makes so much sense. Um, and yet you've moved forward with such beauty and shared such powerful work with us and moved forward in a very optimistic way. I mean, you had another child, you brought another child into your family. Like, that's an optimistic thing, right, to do. And so is that just like do you feel like that comes from your childhood, from your parents were so supportive of you? I loved learning about them in Fly Girl and all of this.
Yeah.
And so do you think that's where that comes from, that like even in the midst of what some consider the most horrible thing that can happen to a person, you didn't your life could have just been game over at that point, and you did not allow that to happen. You went through what you had to go through and then came out on the other side
I,
just
I
you
think there's
know
a few points there. One is, yes, I was raised to be optimistic, despite living in like an Italian opera, with my mean grandmother and my relatives who were various forms of disturbed or whatever, and house full of people and noise. But my parents were always like, as you know, from reading that book, but supportive and optimistic. And they always said, if you want to be a writer, you will be a writer. Like you just try what you want, give it a shot, but give it your best shot. Don't do anything halfway. Gave me advice that I still take every day. I think of how they would have instructed me when I'm confronted with something. Um, but I do think that a woman came to me after Grace died, shortly after Grace died. She was the school librarian at my son's school. And I didn't know this about her, but she had lost a 3-year-old child a few years before. Talk about regrets or whatever. She was rushed and he was whining and she was trying to make dinner and she didn't cut the carrots. She just gave him a carrot and he choked to death on it.
Mm.
And she was, of course, a mess. And then sometime later, she was in the grocery store and she heard two other mothers say, "Oh, there's poor Carla." And she thought, okay, am I going to spend the rest of my life being poor Carla or am I going to take charge of my life? And that's when she became a librarian and, changed her life. But I think it's easier to be poor Carla, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Definitely it is easier to be poor Carla. Yeah. Okay, I want to pivot again here as we start to wrap things up. Um, I'm not going to date either one of us, but I met you some time ago.
Mhm.
You were probably the single most important teacher that I had in 4 years of university at NYU. Without not even probably 100%, you were absolutely the most important teacher that I had there, and changed my life in so many ways for the better. Supported me in ways just off the charts. I won't go into a
Stop,
Cavell fest
stop,
about you.
stop.
um, but I'm really curious because you were an incredible teacher then. I've studied with you even recently. You mentioned a course I took with you maybe 2 years ago. You are a phenomenally successful writer, which not a lot of people can say because there's a lot of writers and not everyone, I've got 3 books out and I'm not a phenomenally, successful writer. It takes a lot. You've written a lot. They've been well received, well reviewed, well sold. And my question to you is, why do you still teach?
Well, I will confess to you, Lauren, that I had a sabbatical this semester, this fall. So I teach at the new school, one class a semester in the MFA program. And I
Mm-hmm.
still sometimes teach at NYU, an undergraduate class.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the time, but if they offer it and I can, I add it in. So again, there's 2 answers to this
But hold on, you
sabbatical I
also
had.
teach at the Rhode Island, which is the one I took, the online program at the Rhode Island program.
Didn't you
I
take
can't.
24 Pearl Street? Did you do the
Yes,
fine
isn't that in Rhode
arts?
Island?
Yeah,
Providence. Yeah.
no, it's
Oh,
in Cape
Providence.
Cod, Cape Cod,
Oh,
Provincetown.
okay. Oh,
Yeah,
Provincetown. I thought Providence. Okay, but you also teach
but
retreats so you do a lot more than just those two.
you're right. But those are the 2 that I usually do. And then the other
Okay.
stuff I decide, yes, I can go there. I can. And this semester, I didn't have an NYU thing, and I had a sabbatical from the new school for the first time in 19 years. And it was heavenly. I'm not saying I don't love teaching, but I was like, I'm going to do whatever I want today. I don't have to meet students or read students.
Right.
So yes, I could definitely be on the waning edge, years. But you get practical things from teaching, like health insurance and a
Mm-hmm.
paycheck, which a writer never gets. So
Yeah.
yes, I get an advance for a book, and that advance is going to last. Stolen Child took me 5 years. So if you
Mm-hmm.
divide the advance I got by 5 years, you can't live off that.
Right.
It sounds big if I tell you.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for, I cobble together
Mm.
uh, a life that has a retirement, like all the practical things writers don't like to think about, and has
Yeah.
health insurance and, all that stuff. So I will keep doing that until I feel maybe either too tired and old or financially secure enough. I always, always love my students. And that is one of the reasons it's easy for me to keep doing it, because I mean, like, my husband and I play the game Code Names with 5 of my students. Like, we get together once every 6 weeks. I just, I'm still friends. John Searles lives around the corner from me. We were at his house for dinner the other night. Like, just, and here I am talking to you. I mean, it's just, I'm lucky because in writing, you really get to know your students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah.
That was the first right answer, not the financial piece.
Sorry, there's a practical side.
No, I mean, because I always was surprised, like I've reached out to you several times over the past few years. I've got this piece I'm working on. Will you read it? And I'm able to hire you to edit something. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, how do you have time for that? And I'm not even one of your regular people. Like, it's always amazing
But
to me that
that's,
you're like, sure, send it on.
well, first of all, because you have family and friends rights, because I've been working with you for so long. But that's the kind of work that really it's fun to do because you make your own schedule for it. You're not going to a classroom or having office hours or all the things that kind of eat away at your writing day
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way. So I
Yeah.
love all the private stuff, and I love doing a retreat in Italy. Who doesn't want to do that?
Right.
Those things,
Yeah.
yeah, are always
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, that is so wonderful. Okay, I just the last couple things here. I love your schedule. can we just talk for a moment about your schedule? Right, this is what I've got down, and you tell me, update it because I might be wrong here. 2 hours to read, 2 hours to write, 2 hours to knit. I'm like, it's so
That's kind of the
awesome.
perfect day, right?
It's a perfect day. It's a perfect day.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Tell me about your, and one of the things too, and I wrote this in a newsletter for our own company, that you got originally you had this writing teacher tell you you have to write for 2 hours a day to be a writer, and so you stopped writing because you didn't have the time because you were a flight attendant at the time. You didn't have the time to do that, so you're like, I guess I'm not going to be a writer. And then take us through that aha moment where you were like, to hell with that. Is this the right thing you do in Italian? You do this? Is that
Yeah.
right? And you say,
Yeah,
no, I am a
yeah.
writer, even if I just have 15 minutes on a flight here. So talk us through that and then how you've got it down today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get that advice though, actually. I think there's some um I think it's a myth, but also I guess it does work for a lot of people. That's why they keep giving it to us,
Mm-hmm.
which is you have to write every day. And the way it was told to me is, if you have to be at work at 9 and you want to be a writer, then you set that alarm for 4 a.m. and you're going to write from 5 to 7 and then you'll get ready for work. And not only was my job prohibitive, like I couldn't do that, but I found that if I forced myself to sit down every day to write, it was terrible. And I had to learn, and I think every writer has to learn what works for you. What is your process? And the only way you know is to try all this advice and then use what works and discard what doesn't. Don't be indebted to what you've heard. You don't have to. It doesn't work for everybody. And what I learned is I think more than I write. I like to carry my stories around. So there are days I don't write at all. The 2 hour thing that you said is exactly right. If I'm in a project, then I want to keep moving the project along. So that's 2 hours a day. But I'll go days and days, like if weeks, months without writing, but I'm writing every minute. I'm carrying the story. I'm thinking about the story. I'm trying to figure out how to better tell it. If I've been given revising notes from an editor, I don't like to just sit down and answer them. I like to kind of think them through. And
Mm-hmm.
so I learned that I spent a lot of time not writing,
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
at a computer, but I'm writing.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I do the same thing too. I run my own business and I'm always
Hmm.
working 24/7.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about
You can't turn
something.
it off.
You
Right.
can't turn it off. Yeah. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in for this. And Anne, thank you so much for sharing. I just, like we said at the beginning, I could just talk to you all day. I just love everything that comes out of you. Thank you.
It's been very nice actually seeing your face for this long a time. Thank you. We usually email. This was really nice.
Yeah, this was really nice. Thanks, Anne.